writing that much about it. You should make it up for someone else. Full disclosure, so I am a firefighter, so I live and breathe ICS, and I'm an ICS purist. If we're doing something and somebody sets up a supply branch and they try to put the COM-L in it, I'm going to have a fit, and I'm going to say, oh no, we've got to change everything. That said, one day I was working EMS for the 24th of July parade. And I was down there, and a person came up and asked me a question. Probably, I don't remember exactly what it was, but probably something like, where's the closest bathrooms? And I was like, gee, I don't know, let's see if we can find out. So I walked along and found a police officer and asked her, I was like, hey, do you know where the closest bathrooms are? And she pulled out this packet, and my eyes got wide, I was like, I don't have a packet. And she flipped through, and she's like, oh yeah, here's the answer to your question. And I'm like, how come I don't have that information? And it really frustrated me. I was like, they have, she probably had 6, 8 pages. I had half a page. And I was like, how come we don't have the same thing? How come I don't have the exact same information she has? So one day I'm taking ICS 400. And I don't know about you guys that have taken ICS 400, but one of the scenarios that we were able to do is set up a pre-planned event. And so we went, oh, this is great. I was like, oh, that's awesome. One of the guys I'm with worked for the U.S. Marshals, so immediately we went, oh, you're in command because pre-planned events, unified command, PD, this is all your side. So we started setting up, we set up our SMART objectives, we set up, and for those of you that can't read this far behind, I'm sorry, I don't like PowerPoint a lot. It has its place, but death by PowerPoint's not the way I like to do things. So if you were hoping for a PowerPoint, I'm sorry. But if you can't read this, this is just our basic little outline, ops, law enforcement, fire with our unified command. And part of our 400, we went, oh, okay, so the PIO is going to need to be involved really early so that way we can advertise our event. And we went, all right, yeah, that's right, and the liaison officer will have to be early. And oh, you know what? Finance is going to have to be really early because can we even put on this event? So I finished 400, I did all of this, I was like, yeah, this is the way we should do it. So I came back to the city, and I have to pat myself on the back because this is one of the times where instead of going ready, fire, aim, I went, let's find out how they're doing it already before I try to change it. So I went, let's go ahead and analyze first and kind of see what's going on. For your military, I thought, ooh, I know how this goes. Observe, then orient, then we can make decisions. So I started asking around, so how do we do pre-planned events? Well, it turns out in Salt Lake City, we run anywhere from 450 to about 500 special events every year. And when I'm counting those, I am not counting film permits, I'm not counting football games up at the U, I'm not counting the Jazz, I'm not counting even demonstrations. These are street fairs, the marathon, the 24th of July, they are things like the Gay Pride Parade and all of that. So 450 to 500, wow. Let's go back to IS 15B, how does that say, or 15A, how does that say? Man, how do we all do this? And so I started trying to go, how do we do it? Well, in the city, the way we do it is we have an event coordinator, and her job is to bring in the permits, make sure the paperwork gets done right. And that's the first thing she does, is she goes, okay, are all the T's crossed, all the I's dotted, have they filled out the form right? And then she sends the permit out. And law enforcement looks at it, and they go, wow, do I have a component to this event? What do I need to do for this event? Is there a traffic problem associated with this event? How do I need to look at this? What's going on? If they think they have a dog in the fight, they write in and say, hey, they have to talk to us before we can approve this permit. And then that's the same thing. Fire Prevention Bureau gets involved. Permits get, for tents or cooking permitting gets involved. The EMS gets involved. All of them look at it individually, kind of like an ESF function, and they'll write in, yeah, I'm fine, I don't need to talk to anybody. Or they write in, yeah, I need to talk to them before they're done. After law enforcement writes this in, we won't issue permit until the law enforcement guy goes, all right, I've talked to the promoter, I've talked to the person who's putting this on, and they have satisfied my needs, whatever those needs are, whether it's security or traffic or whatever, so I'm happy with it. And so that's what our event coordinator does. She makes sure that everybody's signed off. If I'm EMS and I look at it and go, yeah, we don't care, they've got everything they need, I don't even need to look at this one, it doesn't pertain to me. That's what we write in there. We're like, yeah, we don't need to talk to them, go ahead and sign off the permit. So at the end of the day, she makes sure everybody has signed off on the permit. She makes no decisions pertaining to this permit. She just goes, okay, have we signed off on the permit? And at the end of the day, she says, yep, we're signed off on the permit. So then they give the permit out and they let everybody go ahead and do their job. The problem with this system is the same problem I mentioned on the 24th of July. Law enforcement looked at it and they did a great job, and they came up with their piece of it and they wrote their plan for it, but nobody else necessarily got their piece of the plan. So that's where I kind of came in and went, hey, you know, this is where I see a gap. So what can I do to fill this gap? So now I can apply ICS 400. I'm ready to go. And I started looking at it and going, all right, so now I can put PD in charge. I can go back to this, they can be ops, and wait a second, are they really the ones in charge? As I started looking at it, you know, the people I think are in charge is the vendor. It's the person that put in the permit in the first place. They're the ones that need to broadcast it. They're the ones that need to make decisions on go, no go. They're the ones that need to decide, okay, what time do I need the road closed? What time do I need the gates up? They're the ones putting in their own smart objectives, and they're building this themselves. Now, it would be great if they used ICS just like we do, and we all spoke the same language, but that doesn't necessarily happen. So, what's our piece to this? As I started thinking about it, I thought, oh, well, our piece becomes then plans and contingency plans. What if? What happens when this goes bad? What happens if that goes bad? And that kind of thing. And so how can we set up our plans? Well, as I started looking at it, I went, yeah, I still want IAP. I like ICS forms. When I started talking to our police department, they're like, well, we already have a form we fill out. Why ICS forms? And I told them, well, the reason I think we should use ICS forms is because then if we ever have a disaster, our guys are used to looking at ICS forms. They're familiar with them. They don't necessarily always fit into this, but they're familiar with them. So I started going, all right, how can we make this happen? So the first thing I wanted to do was then, for big events is how I tackled it. I went, all right, let's look at the marathon as one of our biggest events. It doesn't bring in as many people as a lot of our other events, but it covers a big portion of the city. It affects a lot of people. Police department is pretty taxed with just taking care of traffic for it. It's a really big event as far as that goes. There's a lot of moving pieces. So the first thing I went is, all right, let's fill out a 201 is what I like the best. I thought about a 202, and typically for an IAP, you would think a 202 would be a little bit better, but the 201 just has a little bit more room to ride on, especially on that layer that has all the empty lines. And I like to use ICS numbers, so I'm sorry, I'll try to keep up with it. The 201 is kind of that first incident action plan that you write on. So I like that 201, and then from there I went, okay, what other form do I need? Well, the 203. The 203 is my plan executive chief taught me, was who's who in the zoo. And I think this is a really important form. This form should say, you know, who is in charge of missing kids or missing children? Who's in charge of the traffic plan? Who's in charge of EMS? And so it doesn't need to be kind of that hierarchy like we're so used to, I don't think. It needs to be who is in charge of these different areas. From there, the next form that's probably the most important to me is the 205 and 205A. That's our communication form. How do I get a hold of those people? Who do I call? How do I get a hold of them? What's their phone number? Where do I find that? And, you know, who do I get there? After the 205A, I thought, okay, what about a 204? And that's kind of, I should be writing some of these down, I'm sorry. That was kind of one I struggled with. Does anyone remember what the 204 is? okay? It's the actual order. And that is, okay, especially for PD, this seems to be a really good form for us. The 204 would say to a particular officer, you need to be at this intersection at this time, here's your supervisor, and here's what's going on with that. PVRA's been, police department's already been doing that, so they're not actually using a official 204, but they are using that type of a thing. And they're already telling their officers where to go. So it doesn't need to be part of that incident action plan. It just needs to be still filled out. But now, at the end of the day, when we finished the marathon, what we ended up with was an incident action plan where everybody had a form that said, these are the people that are in charge, these are the people to get a hold of if there's a problem, and then these are the phone numbers to reach them. And then each individual had their own little sheet that said, okay, if I have to take care of this intersection, here's my directions for how to do that. We also had a map is the other piece that needed to be a part of that. So that took care of most of our ICS part, but yet we got away from the structure, the rigid structure, and I struggled with that. Like I said, I'm an ICS purist, but when you really read NIMS, it says ICS is a structure. It's not, it doesn't have to be these exact things. So that took care of a lot of our problems, but the problem we still have is oftentimes I have, since we have 450, 500 events, I can have 10, 12, 15 events in one weekend. So the piece that we're still missing is kind of that planning section chief, kind of looking at this whole picture and saying, well, wait a second, where's our Venn diagrams? If you remember, a Venn diagram is drawn something like this. Where do we have crossover? If I have more than one event at the same time, where do I have crossover? And those are the other pieces that we need to look at and go, all right, like on the 24th of July, in the city we had the Comic-Con type parade going on at the same time as we had the 24th of July parade going on. And that was okay because the traffic was going to work out all right, but we have to look at that big picture. And that's where I think emergency management comes from. That's where we should be looking at what are those Venn diagrams, where's that crossover, not just what are these individual pieces. So I kind of wanted to do this as a work group where we talked about what are the other people doing. I know everybody in here has been running special events. How have you guys been doing it? What's been working, what hasn't been working? And I said for us, I think the real solution was to pull away from ICS just a little bit, look at it from this ESF structure, but still use ICS forms in order to get our message across and make sure everybody's on the same page. Is anybody else doing that same type of thing? Are there other changes?
I just have a question. I've been an emergency manager now for 8 weeks, so I'm
Congratulations.
really feeling good about things. But if I could get some clarification, are you giving everyone in your group copies of the ICS forms, or are you taking the information from the forms and then just putting all the information in a document that everybody has that you're distributing to everybody that's involved?
So, again, it's kind of as an emergency matter as a planning section chief, we shouldn't be writing a lot ourselves. There are things that we have to write, but I've been giving PD saying, okay, give me a copy of your orders. And then they would send that to me, and then I'll put those into appropriate forms. I've done the same thing with our EMS. Let me have a copy of your orders before you send them out, and then I'll put that together. And I do make one document that I can email out to everybody.
So a document, a copy of all of everybody's ICS forms.
Except for, like I said, the 204, those individual orders. I wouldn't have to, yes, for everything else is one document.
I was just going to say that depending on what organization you work for, whether you have server access, but Dropbox or Google Drive, or things like that can share a lot of information about having to print things, or one big problem we've had is making lots of copies. The stuff changes,
Right.
and where's the most current version of whatever it is that you have. So something like Dropbox is a good way to have it available, people can look at it, they can access it as needed, but you don't have all the negative side of it.
Right, yeah, we try not to print out a whole lot, obviously, but then that gives us that guidance and then the place to start. So if something did happen, I mean, we already have a structure built and we can turn right to that. Did that answer your question? You know, you look at where this has been done successfully, like at Boston, they already have their plans set up and they have the contingency plan. And then that's another piece that we need to work on is the what if. What if something happens on this? Who can we call in or who's already here? Who will then take command? And those positions should already be identified when we had the 203. Were there other questions or comments on how people are doing it? I know I was talking to Provo, and I know at BYU football games, they have very involved where they fill the whole thing out and they do it fully with ICS. And I think that's wonderful, but again, I think that we're missing the boat a little bit. I think we want to be more, instead of forcing ourselves to do ICS, we should have a structure and a communication tool, and I think that's where the IAP comes from.
So similarly, at the university, the planning for large events generally managed by a group of event planners.
Right.
And like us, they have checklists and forms and reporting tools.
Right.
We try and merge our two, because their document is how the event itself is going to come on. And ours is how we're going to support them with public safety and.
Right. And I'm so glad you brought that up. That was the other piece that we discovered. Salt Lake City Fire Department puts on a safety fair once a year. And when we started putting together the safety fair, ICS worked exactly right. We had an incident commander, we had the PIO involved, we had, of course, the safety officer involved. We had our whole planning section. We were able to draw this out nicely, and it worked just like IS-15A says, or just like I did in ICS 400. And it was wonderful for us preparing for the safety fair, because now we are everybody, but it really does boil down to that real incident commander, until something goes wrong for this, is the event organizer. For the marathon, there's a company that provides the marathon, and in fact, they've already had a bunch of meetings, but they started meeting with us just last week. And so those guys are the ones that are going to do all of the logistics and the finance and all of that, not us. So where do we fit in on this? And I said, for me, I think the two pieces where we fit in is obviously we need to say, okay, where in ops are we as fire and EMS? What's going to be required to be there? But how can we all communicate so we all have the same information at the same time? Again, that's why I like the 205, our radio communications for the marathon. Our police department uses 2 radio channels. Our EMS division uses another radio channel. And then the organizer uses ham radio. So right there, we already have 4 different radio systems going on at the same time. So having a good 205, having a good communication leader showing us how to communicate. But more importantly, how do we fit in, and how do we make decisions? If something, all of a sudden weather's really bad, we want to call the marathon and say, yep, they're not going to have it. How do we make that decision? Who has the authority to make that decision? Those are the places where we really fit in, not unless we're running the event ourselves, not in all of the other minutiae as a city anyway. Obviously, we have some people here that don't work for a municipality and maybe have a different approach to that or a view on that. And I'd love to hear some of those things. If not, you're going to have to hear me ramble on and on.
I do want to comment, obviously, we do it the same way. No, but what happens, you were asking about the form and how it goes out. Every event that Matt assembles this information on, he sends me that document, that IAP, with all of the appropriate, everything from threat assessment to who's in charge of what communication. And so while I'm not even there most of the time, I know that if something happens, I know exactly where to go, who I'm looking for. It's not a huge detailed document, but it does provide a framework that any one of us who might be called to respond deals with. It's really effective. And I've really applauded what he's done with the city because it's like pulling teeth to get some people to change.
One of the things, I've had a couple of interesting challenges to it. One thing I found was really interesting is the art festival for the fire department is a really big event for us. A lot of people, a lot of tents, a lot of cooking tents, and a lot of permits that need to be applied for those, and a lot of people in a small amount of area. Start talking to PD, they're like, it's not much of an event for us. There's seldom anybody protesting art. There's seldom a threat associated with that. And we're only closing one street that we close on a regular basis, so it's not a big traffic event for us. And so as I started talking to the police department, they're like, yeah, it's nothing. So we started talking to public utilities, they're like, yeah, again, it's a park area that's already set up for this kind of thing, and you're only closing one street, it's not a big deal. So as a firefighter, man, I looked at the art festival going, man, this is a big one. We really got to have a full IAP. We've got to make sure everybody's on the same page. And at the end of the day, the only people that really needed to be on the same page was fire and EMS. And by that, I mean because our fire prevention bureau is separate from our EMS division, so we just had to make sure that those two were on the same page. And so having a full IAP just ended up not making sense. And I spent weeks circling the wagons and asking questions and going, oh, well, you know whose radio is who, that's easy. And we ended up not even having an IAP for the art festival, even though it was a large event. It didn't impact, and a lot more people than the marathon, it didn't impact the city the way I thought it would. And I found that as a really interesting thing. And again, that's why I think we need to, as emergency managers, have that 10,000-foot view looking at, okay, what's impacting the city? What's impacting multiple agencies? What's impacting traffic in multiple ways? And where is that overlap? Where do we start getting spread thin? We can get spread thin pretty quick by just having a bunch of small events that all need EMS support, as opposed to even just one big event. And then, like I said, the marathon is a really big one for us, just because how geographically spread out it is and how much it impacts all at one time. One of the things, not our city, that I had an experience with was I was trying to get somewhere in the valley one day, and I ran into a marathon. And I knew they put signs up beforehand, and I already knew that I was going to be there, but of course I forgot when I was trying to get there. And the sign didn't say which direction was best to turn, so of course 50, 50, 90, I got it wrong. It's like, well, 90% of the time, and you give me a 50-50 chance. And I turned right when I should have turned left, and I drove all the way up into the mountain and went, oh, I can't cross the marathon anyway. So by this time I'm frustrated, I'm late for where I want to be, so I go, all right, I'll just go ahead, cross State Street, get way west, and then I can head north. I go to cross State Street, and there's a motorcycle rally going on, and some people may know what the day I'm talking about, and they had State Street closed. Now this was multiple jurisdictions across a couple of towns, but I was frustrated as just a consumer, and going, I can't get there from here because no one could pay attention to whether or not, what roads could all be closed at the same time. And I think, again, as an emergency management community, we need to look at that a little bit closer and kind of have that 10,000-foot level where we're going, okay, well, yeah, Salt Lake City PD is tied up with the marathon, but West Jordan is also tied up with this, and South Salt Lake's tied up with this, and now we're really impacting customers. We're really impacting our ability to respond, and if something went wrong, our ability to do mutual aid and everything like that. Now, I don't know how we do that. I don't know how we get to that level, but to me, that's that next step. That's the next place where we need to be. And yeah, I was hoping to do this kind of one as a workshop where we had some answers for that. and looking to where those next steps are. So I got plenty of time, huh? I talk fast, I'm sorry. So I was hoping you guys were listening fast. Read, thanks.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to throw out that our city did, because we've been using ICS for a few years now, majorly helped with some of our major events. And in this community here, some of the major events involve the city. We don't have a lot of people coming in to do their own things. They end up being things where somebody has rented city property, or like our rodeo arena, or it's an event that the city is actually helping to sanction. And one of the biggest things we came up with was a weather guideline. And that became a huge tool as far as a safety feature that the city needed to have, looking at what had happened in Indianapolis and those kinds of events. And so we came up with a weather guideline as to what we were going to do. And lo and behold, last July 24th, we had to use it. We actually had to have that unified command situation come to light, and our events coordinator had to pull the plug, and they evacuated an arena that was basically under the control of the group we were allowing to use it.
And I think
it worked.
that's great. And I do think that's another place where we need to be is where are our thresholds, whether it's weather, it's, for Twilight is another one that we have a big issue with. For those of you that aren't teenagers or have teenagers, the Twilight Concert Fest series is concerts down at Pioneer Park that are really inexpensive. They're like $3 or $5 a ticket. And they bring in some pretty big names for that, and it's every Thursday night. But one of the ones that we knew we were going to have problems with, and not the band, well, not maybe the band too, but one of the ones we knew we were going to have problems with. We knew it was going to be overcrowded. We knew, you know, there are beer sales at the event, and we knew that it was going to bring in a mix of the type of people that may want to try to fight one another or other things like that. It was interesting from a fire prevention standpoint. They have always had what they called out these blowout gates for our exits. We were going to move parts of the fence that were just going to be able to be pushed open, and that way we could just empty everybody out in a hurry. Well, there's a couple of aspects with that. One is it never been tried. So we've approved this permit in the past, but we're like, hey, let's test it once. And sure enough, when the first time they tried to test them, the gates didn't work as advertised. We had to change the gate, or have the vendor change the gates, and we had to test it a second time. We found that really interesting. But the other part is, what do you do with this crowd? If we're now saying, hey, we're canceling this, and you already have a crowd that's over too many in a small area and maybe amped up and are excited, you know, they plan their whole day, maybe their whole week or longer to be at this event. To just cancel it can cause all kinds of different problems. And so where are our problems, you know, how do we do that? We actually looked at this quite a bit. By blowing out those gates, we realized, well, wait a second, that means all the people that have a beer in their hand are no longer meeting state statute for being to have a beer in a park and that kind of thing, because that has to be fenced off. And we worked with the police department a lot on this and talked with them a lot, and we finally came to the conclusion that we're okay with that. If this has gotten so bad that we have to open the blowout gates, we'll get over the statute of having beer in the street or something like that. But those were all discussions that happened beforehand. Fortunately, this last year, the biggest concert didn't turn out to be the issues we had the year before, because we had learned some of our lessons and we were able to talk through this and have it solved before. But yeah, really just canceling an event to the weather, you still end up with a lot of people, as I'm sure you had a whole evacuation issues. But some of the times, if you're canceling for other reasons, you can really get some upset people, and it can cause its own problems.
Those gates also worked in favor of those on the outside, because I was down there when Wu Tang Clan played, and then came down and people rushed in instead.
Right.
I was just going to say that our weather plan actually allowed them to restart the event.
Oh, great.
It was, we detailed it enough to say that it doesn't have to be the end, everybody go home. It's, seek cover, shelter, and then if you can start back up, you can start it back up. I mean, you manage it.
Right.
What you do.
Yeah, absolutely, and manage those expectations. And yeah, this last year as we were getting ready for the Wu-Tang Climb, I learned a lot about how do you manage it? How do you manage it? How do you shut this down? One of the things they talk about is having the band take a break, and that'll slow a lot of stuff down. Another one is just make sure no one else can come in. And people will drift out thinking that they can get back in and don't allow re-entry. And so those are some of the solutions we had worked out beforehand. In this, and again, kind of in this, well, what if? We see this big event coming, what if? What are the things that we need to prepare for? What's our contingency plans? Is anybody doing that kind of, I said, the other piece to this, kind of this 10,000 foot level where we're looking at other agencies even, looking at other cities. Are we seeing that anywhere? Or, I think you're probably seeing some crossover between universities and cities. That's kind of an agency crossover issue, and I know that that's happening. Are there other success stories that way?
I think some of the, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
One success story where I think it worked really well was a funeral that had a lot of jurisdictional involvement. It was a firefighter that passed away that worked in multiple places, Utah County, Salt Lake County, and the actual procession of the funeral crossed jurisdictional lines as far as county lines, went from local city roads obviously through state roads, so you had all those different dynamics of getting everybody on the same page. I think we had a large procession and we get all the different fire departments orchestrated in the appropriate position at the appropriate time. Having an EAP for that event was hugely beneficial. We saw a lot of effective communication utilizing that. Send it out via a PDF document, and everybody's able to scroll through it, on their phone, figure out exactly where they need to be part. Large attendees to this type of funeral, so and everything worked fairly systematic and everybody's safe. So that was a big takeaway.
Thanks for bringing that up. That also reminds me, you asked about sending it out. I did send Wade and Clint our IAP for the marathon because it does cross the city boundary and goes into Unified's in South Salt Lakes area. And so we made sure that they also had that communication. That's something we try to do.
Well, I was going to say, just any of the forms that we could fill out, we use an example, we've gone on our own, we filled out the 215A as well, which is the safety analysis.
Right.
And we're able to learn from not only, racking our brains, putting down some of the concerns and the issues, but afterwards being able to do add more line, other items on each line. We found that once the event was over, everybody was up nice on the grass, and they left big chunks of dry ice, and people were going out and feeding it, and stuff that we can document and the next year learn from.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's another form that I've really been pushing for us to fill out is the 214, which is that unit activity log. And that's that one at the end of the day saying, okay, and the way I always like to fill that out is first, just actions. What were the actions that I did? But the other ones I always like is, what were the issues? What issues did I have? What things didn't work? What were the problems? And then the last one that I learned was the imagination or the dreams or what would be good next time. What's my inspiration? Is there an inspirational thing that, while I was sitting here, I thought, man, wouldn't it be a great idea if whatever? And so if you can try to get you guys to capture that on that 214 right afterwards, that's a great thing to do. And again, it doesn't have to be a 214, it can just be notebook paper or whatever. But I've been pushing for that, and we get that about 20% of the time right now, but we're going to be getting that some more. All right. I just wanted to, we don't have 100% success on this. I don't think most of us do yet. I don't know, maybe some of you do, but we don't in Salt Lake City, but I think we're getting a lot closer. We have nailed down a lot of our bigger events. We still are working on nailing down some more. And so we're still looking to learn how to do it a little bit better. I do think that we need to work together to try to see where are our overlaps. If one city is closing a road, is that going to affect another city or another agency? And I think we can continue to improve on that. And I shouldn't talk, I'll talk slower the next time. So you guys can all see our vendors, the exhibit booth online. Is there anything else anybody wanted to ask or put in before I?
I'm just curious, do you roll in the medical community at all for the big event planning in terms of alerting?
So our EMS division actually does our special event EMS, but we also work with the health department a lot because that's actually where the statute exists for when you have enough people to require additional EMS. The statute exists in the health department's code. And we work with them close to make sure that we're meeting that. But to be honest, no, we haven't really reached out to the surrounding hospitals a lot, other than some of the times the hospitals will provide that EMS coverage or that first aid coverage at the event itself. But no, we haven't, and it's probably the next piece that we should be working on is making sure hospitals know when these big events are happening. Thanks.
With relation to dispatch being involved with these agencies, what involvement have you engaged them with?
So, that's it. So, Salt Lake City, we have our own dispatch center, and so we do work with them, but usually that boils down to what support we need from a fire, EMS, or law enforcement side. And that's probably a place where we can maybe make some more improvements is by bringing them in sooner. Is usually the way that worked for us anyway, is if we determine, oh man, this is going to be a big event, we're going to need a couple of radios, we then go to our dispatch center and say, hey, we need you guys to fund some overtime and bring a person in. And of course, we're able to fund that some by going back to the vendor. But that's how that's been. And so it's more just been a staffing issue than a real planning issue. But yeah, we definitely should bring in our comm people earlier.
Do you have a point at which you think that we need to open our emergency operations center in support of the event?
So I had this whole dream that that's what we would do, is we would open the EOC. I had a dream that our logistics section would provide food and water for all responders that happened to be there at the time. I thought it was funny, at another event I was working, is it just happened to have a fire asset and a police asset parked by one another, and they both had coolers with water in them, and they both had gate, and I was like, why are we doing all this duplication? So I had this whole dream with that kind of working out and staffing the EOC. The real question is what support do they need? Do our EMS or fire or law enforcement need support? I think they need that type of logistical support, whether it's fuel or water or breaks for food and that kind of thing. I don't really see it as an EOC function. Now that said, in the marathon, we spend a lot of time with our command structure at our EOC because we have so many tools to be able to see what's going on other places when we're in that facility. And so we had people in the EOC using those tools, but it wasn't as an EOC. Does that make sense? And so we had command structure being able to watch DOT cameras, being able to watch other cameras that we had set up, being able to communicate and listen to the communications that were going on. But it wasn't as an EOC to begin supporting those responders. I don't know, maybe Corey, you have a...
we as a practical matter, it's not our intent to open the EOC because it feels good. It's generally required. It's expensive. And the simple fact is, calling people in and things that are not needed is costly. And so we do. It's true whether you're talking about a special event or whether you're talking about an incident out in the field. We have what we call a level 3 activation, which may involve components of the EOC, but full activation
say, that we marketed our DOC within our own department structure in the city here as an agency support center. With the idea being that we don't have to open everybody coming in and doing a full-blown EOC to use those tools. We had an instance a couple years back with a snowplow problem, trying to get the city dug out, and they went through some coordination issues that afterwards they realized if we'd had just a couple of people in a place looking at a screen with some maps, could have resolved this. And it's like, okay, so don't think all or nothing. Think of a continuum of what resource do you need and who best can provide that resource, making it available, kind of crossing over sometimes those lanes that people get into where, Cal, you have a fire guy helping this police event? Well, yeah, because we could open up and do just that part you need. We could be there and handle the phones, and we can do that piece. So it's a continuum of what happens. And like you said, I think it goes to the idea that if it really goes south, you're already there.
Right. And then, to me, that's that difference between EOC and IMT, incident management. I said for the marathon, we did more of an incident management than an EOC and a support, though we could have easily moved into an EOC thing. And that's what I see more for a special event or a pre-planned event. All the support should happen before, most of these pre-planned events happen on holidays and weekends. So the pre-plan and most of the EOC work should happen before the event ever happens, whether that's getting water there, having the IAP written, having whatever other support you need. And it shouldn't, I don't think, require an EOC activation. Now, what I wouldn't mind seeing some of these big ones, especially if our intelligence agency says, hey, there's a threat here, is to have somebody on standby maybe and say, hey, you need to be right by your phone, thinking that we might need to call you in today. And that way I can minimize my cost, and that way if nothing happens, I don't activate the EOC, but if something happens, I have people already identified that are going to arrive quickly. That's my take on it. That's just the world according to Matt. But other questions, inputs?